Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Monday, September 12th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Toledo game is in 5 days, the game against Michigan in 75 days. During most weeks, this Monday show will probably be a series of clips from post-game interviews from the previous game, but after one of the crazier weekends of college football in recent memory, feels like we probably need to talk about that and some of the aftermath of some of that and what it will all mean for the Buckeyes. My guest today is Tony Gerdeman of BuckeyeHuddle.com. Later on Monday, we will have a new Michigan Monday episode of the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about teams that played interesting games on Saturday, which definitely does not include Michigan. So, Tony, we'll get to Michigan later, but thank you for being here right now.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Tom. It always seems like it's the week that everybody complains about. There's no good games. It's kind of boring. It's not a great slate, and these are the games that the weeks where there's always something crazy, and you got like crazy game after crazy game after crazy game, kind of like NCAA tournament where you just go from one to the next on all of these false finishes.
Yeah, it was I think we said that on one of the preview shows last week. I don't remember if it was the Friday live show or the Saturday morning Buckeyes This Morning, but on one of those shows we said basically that, like the weeks that everyone goes, oh, this is such a boring week, those are the ones where it just turns into just fireworks factory after fireworks factory exploding. So there were plenty of upsets on Saturday that could have a real impact on the national championship picture, but we're actually going to start today with something on the other end of the spectrum from the national championship. And the end of that is Georgia Southern 45, Nebraska 42. Ohio State has lost one game in program history where they scored 35 points or more. Nebraska just scored a touchdown more than that and still lost to a Sun Belt team with a first-year coach that is just now transitioning out of being an option team for years and years and years. 45 points to Georgia Southern. Scott Frost was fired on Sunday morning. His buyout would have dropped by a little more than $7 million on October 1st, but they decided to fire him now anyway. Tony, I know they just lost to Georgia Southern, and I know they lost to Northwestern week 1, and I know they've lost 10 straight one-score games. Still, firing him now and not waiting 3 weeks to have the buyout drop by $7 million, that seems crazy to me.
Well, Tom, Nebraska has a sellout streak to keep in mind. They've got to keep the airs about them. They got to keep up appearances. It is surprising, though, but it tells you that the Big Ten West is still wide open. Like, it is wide open. Northwestern beats Nebraska in week 1, loses to Duke in week 2 or week 0. They whatever. But, like, this is an opportunity for Nebraska and Trev Alberts to just maybe stop things and reset things. And I'm sure the boosters are like, yes, we will get the $7.5 million that you need extra. This is no problem. Just get it done. We can't take it anymore. I think the student section was chanting Fire Frost during or after that game. And this is, to me, just an effort to keep the fan base engaged and keep the boosters engaged, because you've kind of already lost a team. You've already lost the head coach. You don't want to lose everybody else. And I think this shows that it's not just a money thing. Like, they couldn't take it anymore. And you look at what they've done, I can't blame them. Like, I can't believe it came to this. Like, I thought Scott Frost was going to be good, but he has been everything but. 21, 22 one-point losses. Since he took over, no other team in the country has more than 16. Like, when you have those close losses, I've always attributed that to the coach. And 1 year can be an aberration, but it's just every year with them. And you saw the opener against Northwestern. He actively lost that game for him. And then you lose this one. It's completely unacceptable. And we say that it's unacceptable. It was, and they fired him for it.
Yeah, and then the next question is, what's next for Scott Frost? And it feels like, if ever there has been someone who is destined for a stint at Nick Saban's School for Wayward Boys, it sure feels like Scott Frost might just start looking at places in Tuscaloosa. It would be an absolutely perfect fit for him. I'm not a big believer in Bill O'Brien right now. We'll get to the Alabama team in a little bit, but some kind of a QC guy, some kind of a advisor guy, something on offense, like that feels like a natural fit. The much more interesting question to me, though, is what does Nebraska do next? And I floated some names on Twitter on Sunday, and it feels like they need a program builder at this point. They need a program builder and they need someone who's used to doing more with less, and that's names like Matt Campbell, Lance Leipold, maybe Chris Kleiman from K-State might be good, Jeff Monken from Army. Nebraska going back to running some form of the triple, like that feels right, and that feels like that's something you can do that you're not going to win the national championship, which, guess what, Nebraska, you're not going to win the national championship anyway, so you might as well win 8 games and do it with the offense that got you to the national championship back when you could do that. Troy Calhoun at Air Force seems like he might be a decent fit. Tony, though, I have seen people floating a name that Buckeye fans are pretty familiar with. I will ask you, Urban Frank Meyer, is he going to be the next head coach at Nebraska?
That's a very interesting question, Tom, and a question that has loads of possibilities. Certainly the answer is not just flat out no. I am thinking that I would be shocked if he took that job. I still want to know, does he really want to get back into coaching, college coaching right now? Like, I think the NFL has turned him off. Like, he's not interested in that per se. College coaching at this point, with all of the NIL stuff and having agents involved in college football right now, he's always been a guy who's talked about the third uncles and not wanting to deal with them. Now these third uncles are agents and attorneys and have the ear of the players like never before. It just seems like it's something that would not suit him. However, leaving Jacksonville the way he did, there has to be some part of him that wants to go out a winner. But if you want to go out a winner, I don't know that you do the Nebraska thing. Nebraska, when they had the recruiting, they were recruiting out west in California, and they had the Calibraska thing. I don't know. Does Urban do some like Florida-Braska type of thing and recruit the Sunshine State?
Maybe, but I don't. I mean, in the transfer portal era, you wonder if people are going to leave. You can bring someone to Lincoln, Nebraska on a sunny September afternoon, but then the kids from Tampa or the kids from Dade County. I mean, eventually, once they enroll, winter is going to arrive, and you might lose some people just with that. And yeah, I don't know. I was a big believer that Scott Frost was going to be the guy to fix Nebraska. And now it's like, well, if Scott Frost can't do it, who exactly is going to do it? Because I don't know if Nebraska is appealing to Urban Meyer, because Urban Meyer has always been in places where you could recruit to those places because there were lots of players around. There are not a lot of players around in Nebraska. It has been actually one of the big problems the last 20 years. I wonder, you see the crowds of 27,000 people or 32,000 people or whatever it is at the Rose Bowl. Chip Kelly, if Chip Kelly goes 6-6 again this year, does UCLA open? UCLA is much more in line with the type of program that you would, I could maybe see an Urban Meyer taking, where you're in a kind of talent-rich area. You've got, he has an affection for the Rose Bowl stadium. He talked about that a bunch of times when he was at Ohio State. That feels like more of a natural fit somewhere like that. Not necessarily UCLA itself, but somewhere in more of a talent-rich area where he's, and that is a winnable, that is a job where you can win, and then you're going to be moving into the Big Ten soon. So, that feels like, yes, you've got Lincoln Riley across town, and yes, it looks like Lincoln Riley might be getting things fired up, but I still think that might be a place. If you tell me he is going to be coaching in one of those two places next year, I put UCLA at about 85%. Now we'll get on kind of the rest of the weekend, because this is not, in fact, a Nebraska football podcast. There was a lot to process from Saturday, because, you never want to overreact to the early results, week 1 to week 2, because it feels like we still really don't know quite who is good yet. But, Alabama just escaping Texas 20-19. I think you go back and listen to our weekend preview show. I was pretty sure Alabama was just going to clobber Texas. Texas might have a legitimate defense this year, and again, I don't want to start making any real declarative statements about that and definitive statements about that, but it feels like the defense in Austin might be legit for the first time in quite a while. But it also feels like, Alabama looks like they might have some issues on the offensive line and at receiver. That Alabama offense, it's just one game, but their first week victim, Utah State, got lost to Weber State. So okay, so week 1 now means nothing. You have a real close, low-scoring game in Austin. I think there's some questions around Alabama right now that we maybe didn't have 72 hours ago.
Yeah, I agree. The offensive line looks to be an issue. And what does an issue at Alabama mean? What they're not a top 10 offensive line, something like that. But you look at what they did, Bryce Young, Heisman winner, averaging 5.5 yards a pass attempt. He threw 39 passes for 213 yards. Like, that's not very good. But that goes back to the skill around them, where the last couple of years, they consistently go to the transfer portal, because I don't know what's wrong with their recruiting. I don't know if they're doing, is Nick Saban doing what Urban Meyer was used to be accused of, just recruiting star rankings, basing his recruiting on that, and some of the guys that he's recruiting aren't panning out because they went to the portal again for a couple of receivers, just like they did the year before. Jamison Williams, Jahmyr Gibbs, former Georgia Tech running back, is there, one of the leading Heisman contenders, and he was held to, I think, 9 carries for 22 yards in this game. So, he got stifled pretty well. He was the leading receiver. They get like 9 catches for 70-some yards, to give you an idea of the lack of outside talent. So I think there are concerns, and when you look at the SEC, obviously it's the best conference in football. So there, any given week, almost, depending on who they run into, like I could even like Texas A&M, for whatever reason they get up for Alabama. That's just what they do. But that's also what Jimbo Fisher does: loses a bad one and then wins a good one, and everybody excuses everything else. So yeah, offensively, Alabama is an issue. I like, once again, Alabama knocks out Texas's starting quarterback, and that ends up helping them win the game. And they did it in 2009 with Colt McCoy in a national championship game. Did it in this one with Quinn Ewers, who looks like he'll be out 4 to 6 weeks. They're saying Quinn Ewers was lighting them up, and you wonder what would happen if he stayed in that game. And all credit to Hudson Card, who came in. He played well also, but Quinn Ewers has the downfield arm, and that was taking advantage of maybe perhaps another weakness on the Alabama defense.
That was really interesting, because it looked like they were just kind of throwing some max protect in there and just having him heave one downfield, and they were, Xavier Worthy. There's a what if. What if Xavier Worthy had stuck with Michigan? Boy, that might change some things in the Wolverine offense this year. But yeah, that's another kind of potential concern for Alabama. And we're talking about all this as if, these are terrible things, and oh boy, they're doomed, and they're going to go 11-1 again this year, and they'll probably be in the national championship game again this year, because this is Nick Saban and this is what he does. So don't when we're talking about the college football playoff in 3 months, don't look back at the Texas game and be pointing at that as a reason why they're not going to be any good in the college football playoff. There's a lot of football between then and now. Nick Saban generally gets this stuff sorted out. The rest of the top 5, not nearly as interesting as the Alabama game. You probably saw the Ohio State game, 45-12 over Arkansas State. Georgia and Clemson both just kind of looked like they were going through the motions against FCS programs. Michigan killed the functional equivalent of a mid-level FCS program in Hawaii. That's the rest of the top 5. The new AP Top 25 came out. Georgia has jumped Alabama into the top spot. The Tide now number 2. Buckeyes are number 3. I saw Tide fans upset about that online. I saw Buckeye fans upset about that online. I saw people voting Ohio State number 1. To me, though, number 1 Georgia, number 2 Alabama, number 3 Ohio State probably feels about right now, because, Ohio State's quality win doesn't look quite as quality as it did 7 days ago, and, Georgia's win over Oregon holds up pretty well, I think, and so I think 1 Georgia, 2 Alabama, 3 Ohio State feels pretty okay right now. Do you have quarrels with that?
No, I don't. And no matter what we think of Texas going there and winning at Texas, that's a good win. That's something that it's certainly not a neutral site. So give credit to Alabama for actually going on the road and winning a game. And yeah, I don't have a problem with this 1, 2, 3 in this order. This is probably how I would have it, because we watch Ohio State closely, and they should have. They didn't cover, Tom. So that's one issue. You don't cover against an Arkansas State. We're going to look with frowns on that one. But yeah, I'm actually surprised that there's an AP vote for Ohio State number 1.
Yeah, there were 4 other big top 15 kind of upsets on Saturday. App State goes into College Station, beats Jimbo Fisher. You mentioned the bad loss he has. Well, there you go. Jimbo Fisher's Brinks truck loses 17-14 to App State. Marshall beats Notre Dame in South Bend. If you want to hear our reaction to that, we talked about that. Well, you can listen to us process that information live as on the Buckeye Huddle postgame show from Saturday. BYU beat Baylor on Saturday night. Kentucky beats Florida. Florida coming off that big win over Utah. I was like, oh boy, maybe Billy Napier's got it going, and then Kentucky beats them. And then Tennessee beat Pitt. And then maybe the most surprising to me was Wazoo, who really looked terrible against Idaho in week 1, goes into Camp Randall and upsets Wisconsin. And you're going to sometimes get crazy weeks like that early in the season. It's usually a sign there's going to be a pretty good parity in that sort of 5 through 25 level of the sport. So my question to you, Tony, is outside of the current top 5, so we're going to set aside Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, Michigan. Set those 5 teams to the side right now. I think you sort of feel like they're going to be good teams. They're at least going to be kind of top 10 teams by the time the season's over. Outside of those 5, give me 2 or 3 teams that you're maybe most confident finish the year in the top 10 outside of those 5.
The first team that comes to my mind is BYU, who had a really good win against Baylor at home. Next week they go to Oregon, and that's what Oregon I think is ranked 25th right now. But then you look, they have a game at Notre Dame. You figure they should win that. They have a home game against Arkansas in the middle of the season. If they win that, now you're talking about BYU being this year's Cincinnati. And if there's only a top 3 nationally that everybody knows is the top 3, and you don't know who the number 4 team is, we could see BYU continue to creep up and maybe get into that mix, because they're going to be favored in almost every game, save for maybe that Arkansas game. And since it's at home, that may be a pick 'em. Depends on what Arkansas does at that point. But I think BYU is one to watch. Kentucky is an interesting story. I didn't expect them to win because they can't run the ball. But as long as Florida isn't doing anything offensively, I guess it doesn't matter. And Kentucky has to go to Tennessee, which is going to be a difficult one. Of course, they'll have Georgia at home. I think maybe they lose both of those, so I don't think they remain in there. USC will be interesting to watch. They are obviously outside of the top 10, but yeah, I think those 3. I think USC with the offense and just the momentum that they have right now. I'm interested to see if they have a new culture where they don't just have bad losses, but then that was Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma as well. So he might just bring that different culture and still have the same results. But for me, I go to BYU. I suppose I could look at Miami's schedule and tell you, but I can't process Miami doing anything to become this top 5 team, top 10 team, or anything like that in November. In September, fine, it is what it is.
Yeah, BYU is an interesting answer because the back half of their schedule, all the teams you mentioned there are front half of their schedule. They run into the same problem that a lot of independents have, which is once you get into conference season, none of the conference teams wants to schedule a good non-conference team, out of conference in the middle of conference season. So the back half of BYU's schedule is at Liberty, East Carolina, at Boise State, which is not what it used to be, Utah Tech, and then at Stanford, which is also not what it used to be. So that feels like that's going to be really kind of a, it doesn't feel like there's going to be a lot of challenges down the line. So that is actually a really good choice for the last, that one of those last spots towards the end of the list. So that's going to do it for today's show. We had, there's kind of a lot to talk about in what was supposed to be a very boring week 2. Week 3 looks like, I don't think anyone's talking about this as one of the greatest weeks in college football history, which means, hey, we might get another crazy week, which always looking forward to those. Ohio State playing a primetime game against Toledo this weekend. We will have complete coverage of that. Pre-game coverage, post-game coverage, all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. We'll, of course, have interviews with players and coaches all throughout the week. In the lead up to that game, we'll have some good recruiting coverage this week as well. Mark Givler was on the road covering some high school games last weekend. Very busy weekend for him, so we'll have coverage of that on Buckeyes Buckeyes tomorrow morning as well. And then Tony and I will have lots and lots of team coverage on the Buckeye Weekly podcast. You can find all of those wherever fine podcasts are sold. Just search Buckeye Huddle there. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. Make sure you're subscribed, hit that bell so you get notified every time we post a new video, so you never miss a thing. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.